right, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for another Ask the Alliance. I'm Adam Miller, our communications director here at the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. I'm so excited to be here with you. Before we begin and hand it off to Jamie, just want to go through a few housekeeping notes. If you wish to have your camera on, that's fine, but please try to keep yourself muted so that we can hear Jamie throughout the presentation. If you have questions for Jamie today, please comment them in the chat. We have a few experts inside of the chat, keeping an eye on it, and they're going to be answering some questions in the chat. Jamie has a lot to share, so we're going to try to answer some of them in the chat throughout the presentation, and then we'll also be collecting questions that we don't get to in the chat, and Jamie will be answering them at the end of the presentation. So for those of you who don't know the Alliance, we were founded in 1971, and we're a nonprofit that restores the lands and waters of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Our collaborative and action-oriented approach delivers on-the-ground solutions, technical assistance, and builds capacity to achieve healthier lands and cleaner water. And for us here at the Alliance, we do that by working upstream to build resilience on the land and bring long-term improvement to water quality in communities throughout the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed. So in order to pull that off, we've got 4 offices that are strategically chosen places around the watershed. We were headquartered in Annapolis, Maryland, and then we have offices in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Richmond, Virginia, as well as Washington, D.C. And out of those 4 offices, we do our work in 4 program areas of agriculture, forest, green infrastructure, and stewardship and engagement. Each of those programs is designed to bring much needed solutions to the problems that affect the Chesapeake Bay downstream. So if you're interested in learning more about your work, you're at the right place, right? Because you're at the right place because we're going to be sharing a lot today, but our website has a ton of information on it about our team and our strategy and our projects, and we hope that you visit that to learn more. Our volunteer page on our website at allianceforthebay.org/volunteer is also a wonderful place to visit if you want to learn more about visiting our team in the field and help us plant trees or maintain trees or clean up your neighborhood. So after Jamie's presentation today, we have one more Ask the Alliance left, and it's an exciting one about turtles of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. I'm really looking forward to checking that one out, and I hope you are too. So if you're not signed up for it and you want to be, please navigate over to the events page on our website and sign up. So again, thank you so much for joining us today, and I couldn't be more excited to hand it over to Jamie for today's presentation. Jamie, please take it away.
Thank you, Adam. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here today to talk about DIY rain gardens. I'm Jamie Alberti. I'm the Green Infrastructure Program Director at the Alliance. And in the background, we have some other team members who will be helping us out, answering some questions in the chat, and maybe popping on with some additional information as we move along. Are you guys able to see my screen advancing? I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties. Bear with me just a second.
I'm not seeing it advancing, Jamie.
Oh,
there we go.
I'll have to click right on the screen. Okay. So to start out with, on the screen, a couple of things that we're going to be talking about as far as do-it-yourself rain gardens. But before we get into that, I just want to preface it by saying we are going to be talking today about simple, relatively easy to install rain gardens. So we're not going to talk about engineered rain gardens that have under drains, those that are really designed to really manage a large volume of stormwater. Those more like commercial or those kind of things. We're keeping it small scale, simple, residential sized rain gardens for today. The second thing that I want to mention, here's as good a place as any, is before you decide to go forward with a rain garden for your property, it's good to check your local municipality regulations to see if you need a permit. We're broadcasting here today from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. They require permits for any kind of rain garden that you're going to install. So good to know what those requirements are before you get into it and start planning your garden. Okay, a lot to cover today. I'm going to try to move through these topics as quickly as I can. Again, please put your questions in the chat and we'll try to answer them as we go in the chat, or we'll have hopefully some time at the end to circle back to some of them. So we're going to run through these things here. I'm going to skip over it for now in the sake of time. Let's get rolling here. Okay. Before we talk about rain gardens specifically, it's good to take a step back and kind of get the background of why we might want to install a rain garden in the first place. So you can see here on the screen, on the left side is an image of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. The Chesapeake Bay watershed is 64,000 square miles. There's 150 major rivers and streams within this area, and it's home to over 18 million people. With all those people come a lot of development, housing for folks, businesses, infrastructure, roadways, all of those things combined add to impervious surface cover within the watershed. Impervious surface, think of concrete, asphalt, areas that water cannot infiltrate into. So the problem with impervious surface, when it rains, we get stormwater. Stormwater normally that would be naturally draining into the ground is now running across these impervious surfaces and ending up in our waterways, typically through storm drains. So you can see a couple of images here about some of the issues that stormwater can cause. The center photo, stormwater is going to pick up whatever is along its path on the way. So oils, trash, pet waste, fertilizers, all of those things ending up in that storm drain. In most cases, that storm drain is going to empty directly into a local waterway. You can see on the right side an image of a stream where one of those storm drains or one or more of those storm drains outfall. As water is coursing along impervious surface is picking up speed, and the velocity of that water when it hits that stream can be very intense. So you can see how eroded that stream bank is in that photo. So a lot of issues that can happen with stormwater. Here, I'm not going to talk about these, but I'm sure you've seen a lot of these issues. Storm events are getting worse. You're seeing more and more flooding and issues as a result of development and, you know, not being able to handle the volume of stormwater currently. So what can we do? Green infrastructure is one way that we can kind of apply to developed areas to help manage stormwater. So these practices try to mimic the natural cycle of water, what it would have been like before that development was there, or at least as close as we can kind of work it out to be. So installing green infrastructure practices, and a rain garden is one example. There's lots of other wonderful practices out there. Hopefully you're getting some links in the chat to some additional resources about some of those other practices. Don't have time to mention them today, but check them out and consider them, because green infrastructure practices really are important in helping reduce flooding. They're really beneficial for wildlife, pollinators, improving air quality, and really just helping to infiltrate some of this water in our communities. Okay, so as I mentioned today, we're talking all about rain gardens. So again, here's a simple example of a rain garden. Rain gardens are going to vary in how they look, but this encompasses the essential components of a rain garden. So what it is a garden that is designed to intercept and slowly infiltrate water into the ground. So we're looking to capture water somewhere, hold it temporarily, and let it slowly release into the ground rather than that quick moving surface runoff that you often see. So in this photo, you can see that we have a home on the right side. There's a downspout running here from the rooftop of this home. The water is entering the rain garden here. There's some stone right in this area that is spread out. So when the water hits it, like I said, when water is coming out of a pipe, it's carrying a lot of velocity. So we want to disperse some of that energy on that stone, spread it out, slow it down, so it's not scouring that area right there. The rain garden itself essentially is designed to have a bowl shape. We want to collect that water, temporarily hold it. So we have a bowl-shaped design. On the opposite side of where the water comes in, we'll build a berm around it, essentially a little wall to help keep that water where we want it to be until it's time for it to infiltrate into the ground or flow away from the rain garden area. Within this bowl-shaped garden, we have a mix of soil called bioretention mix. You may often also hear rain gardens referred to as bioretention. Either one is fine. In the rain garden, we have this special mix of soil that is helpful to allow that water to infiltrate into the ground. We'll talk about that in a little bit. We also up here have a ponding depth. So no soil, no mulch in that area. It allows the water to fill up. So we want to, once a rain garden's installed, we want to see a little bit of a depression there so that the water is collecting in there for a short period of time. And then really important, using native plants to fill in the garden. These native plants are acclimated to the conditions of the Chesapeake region. So they don't require a lot of water, essentially just in periods of drought. They don't need fertilizers, pesticides. They're really beneficial for wildlife, pollinators, birds. They also play a really nice role in uptaking nutrients and some of the pollutants that normally would just be carried straight into the storm drains. So they can uptake some of that as well. All right, keep on going here. So when you're looking to do a rain garden, there's a couple things that we want to look for. So if this is your home, we first want to look for where are we going to capture water from. So in this example here, this home has 3 different downspouts on the front of it, all draining this roof area, the whole front of the house. So that's something we want to look at. We're looking at this yard. It's sloping away from the home, exactly what we want to see. Okay, so we're looking in this area. We want to make sure we have enough distance in here. We want to keep a safe distance from the home so we don't cause any water issues in the basement. And we'll get into this a little bit more in a minute. And we want to place this garden in a location that's going to intercept water. We do not want to put it at the lowest point on the property. That's a good way to create a muddy swimming pool, and that is not what we want. We want to capture that water before it gets to the lowest point. Okay, circling back to these 3 downspouts up here. In this case, this downspout is pretty accessible. So is this one right here. But this one is kind of a little bit harder to see on this side. It empties over here on the other side of the walkway. We have a big tree right there. It's pretty close to the neighboring home. There's not a lot of space. So this really is not a downspout that would be feasible for us to use to direct into a rain garden. If we were to use it, we'd have to direct it either over or under this walkway, which has a lot of kind of technical aspects that you have to comply with in order to do that. So as far as a simple DIY rain garden, we're really just looking at one or both. I would recommend both, which would probably capture probably about half, maybe a little more than half of this front roof area. All right, let's move on to the next one. As I mentioned, when we're looking for a good location to place a rain garden, we want to be at least 10 feet away from the foundation of the home. We don't want to cause any water issues right up against the foundation. We don't want the yard to slope towards the house for the same reason. You know, we don't want that water collecting near the foundation. So we ideally want it to be a slight slope away from the house. A similar issue if you have retaining walls. We don't want to cause any damage to retaining walls due to the hydrostatic pressure of the water, the water collecting in these rain gardens. So we want to keep away from retaining walls when we can. Try keep 10 feet away from them as best you can. And there's some things that we can do, and we'll talk about in trying to design gardens in smaller spaces where you have space constraints. The other thing you want to look for is large trees in your yard. We don't want to do any rain gardens below trees. We want to stay outside of where those really large roots are. We don't want to be digging into them. If you damage those larger roots of the tree, you could potentially harm that tree, possibly kill it. So we want to stay outside of the drip line of the tree, which in simple terms, essentially is where as far out as the branches extend on that tree. So we kind of want to be outside of that area. Secondly, you know, we don't want to be digging in there too, because if you've ever tried to battle tree roots, you know, it's very labor intensive. So we want to avoid that. Okay. Same thing, while we want to keep it away from your home, we also want to keep any water flowing across property lines. You know, we don't want the garden right up against property lines. We don't want to see water crossing property lines or close by to any neighboring homes or other structures that could be damaged by the water. And again, we're going to be checking for utilities because we don't want to be digging into any underground utilities or compromising those. Okay. Example of a property. Can we do a rain garden here? So a couple things that we want to look for. First, it's hard to tell, but on this home, there's a downspout on this back corner that currently is extended out here. On this front corner, right behind this tree, is another downspout that comes down and extends out towards the front. So they're already trying to get that water away from the foundation. Some other things to consider when thinking about a good place to put a rain garden on this property, there's a large tree in front here. So, you know, we want to keep that in mind. We don't want to get under or too close to that tree. Over here too, we have utilities. It's really important to call this utility, get those marked, see where those lines are, because we do want to stay away from those. So in this case, you know, maybe back here in this backyard area might be a good place for a rain garden. And it would be possible to extend this downspout out there and maybe turn this one to go this way and meet up with that one as well. Same thing for this one. This one, you know, kind of illustrates a little bit more of the slope. So this yard slopes down, levels out a little bit, and then slopes down some more. The downspout here collects water from this entire front half of the home, this entire roof area. So that's a lot of water. Other things to note here, we have utilities here. So again, we want to be careful of that. Right now, this water is kind of already piped out over that. So if we keep that as is, a little bit off screen, there's another tree over here. There may be a potential to do a rain garden in here. kind of connect and have it overflow that way. Again, we wouldn't want to do anything over here sloping down towards the home. You'd have to, if a downspout was over here, you'd have to extend it over or under that walkway, which is tough to do. So over here might be our best bet. One last example, this is a more urban home, smaller lot sizes. So you might want to look into some options for designing your garden a little bit differently to make it fit in here. Instead of having a large, wide rain garden, we can make it a little smaller, but deeper potentially. So we want to also look at this downspout here is connected to a rain barrel. That's no problem. Rain barrels have overflows that we can then connect to rain gardens. We like to do that. There's also a downspout back here that we could potentially extend out as well to capture that roof area. Again, we want to make sure we're not overflowing out onto any sidewalks or impervious surface, leaving enough room from the home. So lots of things to consider in selecting a location for your rain garden. Okay. We've looked at our property. We've looked at all of those things that we need to be sure that we're avoiding, and we've selected a location. Now we want to figure out, well, how big do I need to make my rain garden? I've included here rain garden sizing formula. There's a lot there, but don't worry, we're going to break it down really quick for you. I have a resource in the chat for you that can help you walk through it step by step. So to size your rain garden, first we need to figure out how much water we want to capture in that rain garden. For most residential rain gardens, we are looking to capture water from the roof, stormwater draining off the roof down the downspout. We want to direct that into the rain garden. So first thing we need to do is figure out what is this drainage area. So essentially length times width is what we're looking for. You can pace it off, use your measuring tape, the side of the home, and then you want to measure to where that peak is, length times width. What I like to do is use Google Maps, use the satellite view, and then you can go on there and right click and drop a point here, 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 and it'll calculate the square footage of this roof area for you. So it's very handy dandy. Okay, so downspout 1, we're calling that 25 feet by 19 feet. So 475 square feet of roof area. We've got a porch here. Why not add a little bit of extra water to the rain garden? So 5 by 8 there, another 40. So we have a total drainage area of 515 square feet. All right. You can also add in water runoff from patios, driveways, even sheet flow across lawns. It's just a little trickier to calculate that volume of water, but feel free to add it in. Okay, next thing, now that we know the drainage area, we want to know how big of a rain event do we want to be able to handle?
Hey, Jamie.
Yes.
Can I jump in real quick about the
Yes, please do.
rainwater from other areas?
Yep.
If you're talking about water coming off a pervious surface, something where water can soak in, you'll want to look up your runoff coefficient, which can be found online, to calculate how much water is actually flowing and how much is soaking in. There's a specific coefficient for turf grass versus asphalt. So that's the kind of complicating factor there.
Yes, thank you, Jordan. I purposely glossed over that because it can get very complicated in adding in additional areas. Okay, rain events. So the example that we have here is for a 1.2 inch rain event or storm event. At the time that we decided this is what we want to create our rain garden to handle, 90% of the rain events were 1.2 inches or less. So that means our rain garden is capturing at least 90% of all the rain events, which is wonderful. You know, we're getting increasingly intense storms. I have seen rain gardens capture anywhere from a 1-inch rain event up to 3 inches. So you can decide how much water you want to capture in here. So in this example, we have 1.2 inch rain event or storm event. We want to convert that figure into feet. So we're dividing it by 12. We're getting the 0.1 feet. Next up, we want to look at the volume that our rain garden needs to handle. So we're going back to that total drainage area that we calculated on the last slide, multiply it by the rain event that we want to capture. So the volume that we need to hold in our rain garden is 51.5 cubic feet. Okay, so how big surface area wise does our rain garden need to be? So length times width, essentially. Well, it depends. Really, you need to decide how much room do you have to play with. Can you put in a really big rain garden length times width wise? If you can, you don't have to dig as deep. If you're limited in the space that you have available, you can make a smaller rain garden, but dig it out deeper, still holding the same amount of volume, but just some more laterally, some more vertically. Okay, so in this example here, we're doing the volume that we already calculated in the last slide. A couple other decisions that we need to make. Ponding depth. Typically that's between 4 to 8 inches. Most commonly I see 6 inches. So we're going to go with 6 inches for this example. And then the depth of your bioretention soil mix. So again, that depends on how much digging you want to do. Do you want to make a really large but more shallow rain garden, or do you want to make a deeper but smaller rain garden? And that will, you know, kind of tell you here how deep that mix is. For this example, we're planning to dig down 2 feet. So the first 6 inches will be ponding depth. The next 18 inches will be bioretention mix. The other thing that you'll need to know is void ratio. I think pretty much standard across the board. Everything that I've seen is 30%. So you'll be safe to use that number. So we're going to plug in a 0.3 for the void ratio. So again, drainage area, converting that 6 inches of ponding depth into feet, so 1/2 foot. The bioretention mix, 18 inches, is 1.5 feet, times the void ratio. Do the math out. What we're getting is 54 square feet rain garden. So essentially length times width-ish. And that's digging down 2 feet and having a 6-inch ponding depth and an 18-inch bioretention mix. Again, there's a resource available to you. You can play around with the numbers. The long and the short of it, the bigger surface area you make your rain garden, the less deep it needs to be. The smaller you make it, the deeper you need to make it. A few just sample rain garden sizes. I pulled some typical garden sizes from 3 different programs within the Chesapeake watershed: River Smart Homes in Washington, D.C., Rainscapes in Montgomery County, Maryland, VCAP, which is the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program, which is across the state of Virginia. So you can see kind of some average sizes of rain gardens, ponding depth, bioretention depth, typically that they see, and you know, just kind of some information that I was able to collect just to give you an idea of what's being installed out there. Okay. So now that we know where we want to put the rain garden, we know roughly what size we want it to be. Now we need to test the soil. We want to do a percolation test, which is going to tell us currently how easily or that water, when it hits the ground, is going to infiltrate into the ground. First thing, as always, before you dig, call Miss Utility. We definitely don't want to hit any utilities. We want to do this perk test where you plan to do your rain garden. We have found different areas on the property can have different perk rates. So you want to make sure you're doing it in the close location where you want to dig out that rain garden. Okay. First things up, you've already decided how deep you want to make your rain garden. So you want to dig your test well down to that depth. We used a 2-foot example. So we would want to dig out 2 feet down for our perk test well. We'll want to fill that about halfway. So in this example, about 12 inches, and we want to let that drain. We want to saturate that soil first. Once that's drained, we want to fill it up again halfway to the 12-inch mark in this case. And then we want to monitor and time how long it takes for that water to drain within that hole. Some people do it different ways. I prefer to get a perk rate. So how long does it take inches per hour for that water to drain? So if you go out, fill the hole, come back 6 hours later, in our example, we filled it 12 inches, say it drops down to 6 inches after 6 hours. So it's half of that water is already drained. If you do the math, 12 minus 6 is 6 divided by 6 hours, you get a 1 inch per hour perk rate, which is a great rate. So I would, the lowest you really want to go is 0.25, 0.3 inches per hour. If water doesn't drain, 24 hours is really good. Absolutely no more than 36 hours. If you still have water left in that hole after 36 hours, that's a failed perk test. You don't want to do a rain garden in there. You don't want to create a muddy swimming pool in your yard in that location. So either you'll need to try a different area or think about maybe a different green infrastructure practice that you could implement. Okay, I'm going to just go over this really quickly. It could be helpful to just sketch out where you want the rain garden, how you want to run the downspout, what the rough sizes are, making sure that you're keeping safe distances from foundations, retaining walls, neighboring properties, all of that sort of thing. So it can just be a super simple sketch, making sure you're hitting all of those pieces. We'll talk about plant selection in a minute. Oh, right now. Again, I mentioned we want to use native plants. Those are going to be your best bet as far as low maintenance are concerned, and really providing benefits, to your property and to the wildlife and pollinators around. So we have a few different resources. We're not going to get into particulars of, plants to pick, but we do have the Native Plant Center. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Guide has a huge catalog of native plants. I will just caution you, as you're looking through, make a list of a lot of different options, because some plants are relatively easy to get certain times of year, some are not. So have backup options in mind when you're going to purchase your plants from somewhere, that they might not carry them at that time of year. Fall is an amazing time to plant. So if you're considering a rain garden, fall is coming up. Wonderful time to plant. Okay. The other resource that I was going to mention, Chesapeake Conservation Landscape Council has a native plant guidebook that they have kind of gone through a collection of different natives and selected the ones that are most successful to use in rain gardens in the Chesapeake watershed and collected it in this book. It's available for purchase if that's of interest to you, but a really wonderful resource that I would recommend if that's of interest. Okay. As you're selecting your native plants to install in the gardens, remember you're designing a bowl-shaped garden. It's sort of a bathtub shape. You want the sides sloping, the bottom to be flat across, so that you can collect water evenly throughout your rain garden. In the center of that bowl, you'll want to have your more water-loving plants, because it could be filled with water temporarily up to 24, 48 hours, potentially after a rain event. So you want water-tolerant plants in the center, and the more drought-resistant plants towards the edge where it's drier. One thing to note, if you want to put shrubs in your garden, definitely limit the number that you're using. In doing inspections, we have found shrubs can very easily take over the entire garden if you're not careful about selecting them and put in too many. Just do some research on them and just limit the number that you're putting in. Listed here, just a few suggestions, but you're really going to want to look at the specific plants that you're putting in and spacing according to those guidelines. Again, if you live in an area that offers a rebate program or something, you'll want to make sure that you're looking at their requirements as you're designing and selecting plants. All right, now the fun part. Actually getting to the installation of the garden. Okay, so we know the location, we know the size, the depth. We've done the perk test already. We've gotten a passing perk rate. So we're going to dig out the garden here. First thing, we're removing all of the grass and getting rid of that. Don't use herbicides in there. You know, we're going to be we're installing plants in here. So we want to avoid using those. As we're digging down, this first layer of soil that you're going to come to may be a really nice topsoil that you might want to save, potentially use that to mix into your bioretention mix. So that first layer could be very beneficial to you. You can kind of see as you go deeper, this more reddish color, you're getting into the more clay soil. Not so good for the bioretention mix. You want that to be porous and allow water to infiltrate, but it can be really beneficial in helping you to create the berm, which we'll talk about more in a minute. Okay. The area that you've decided to install your rain garden may or may not have a significant slope. Ideally, you know, we have a slight slope. It is possible to put a rain garden in on a relatively flat area, but you have to remember you need to get the water to your garden. So if you're directing a downspout to your garden, you may have to artificially create a slope to allow that water to flow from the original point into your rain garden. And we typically recommend about a 2% downgrade slope to allow that water to flow and not get stuck in the piping or back up towards the house. If you have, if this is the look of your property to start out with, that you're putting a rain garden in, first thing you want to do is dig out this area. We want a flat, level bottom to your rain garden. Again, think a bathtub. We want the sides sloping. And then we want to use some of that clay soil on the other side. So water is going to be coming this way. It's going to evenly fill up this. And we want to create essentially a little wall on the downslope side to create that other end of the bowl to hold that water in. We want the water to fill up in here during a rain event and then slowly infiltrate to the ground. If we get one of those really crazy storms, water is going to fill up and then overflow, and that's totally fine. We're designing it to do that as well. Okay, so digging out, putting in this berm here, we'll see in the next slide how to make sure that this is level with the top side. Again, if you're on a steeper slope, that means more digging and a higher berm to level it out. A little bit more labor, but it is possible. At some point, if you get too steep, safety issues are going to come into play along with stabilization. Keeping that slope intact on the downhill side is going to get to be difficult. So you may want to look for a different area or opportunity to capture that water if you're talking about major slopes. The other option for working on a steep slope potentially is doing a series of rain gardens, kind of like a stepping pattern down with swales and different things. So there are some other options there if you have a slope to help slow down that water and capture it that way. Okay, berm creation. You know, again, we really want to make sure the entire bottom of the rain garden, the top end, the lower end, all of those things are level. We want water to come in and evenly disperse around the entirety of the rain garden. If you build a 100 square foot rain garden and say the right side is lower than the left side, and that water, what's water want to do? It wants to go to the lowest point. So it's going to travel along that right side where it's lower and completely bypass the rest of your garden. So say it's only hitting 25%, you only have 25% efficiency of that garden if you're not making it level. We want the water to flow in and spread out through the entirety. That's why it's really important to make sure that rain garden is level, the bottom of it and the top edges. Again, you can see here, building that berm on the other opposite side of where the water comes in. The size of the berm, again, is going to depend on the slope of the rain garden. If you have a relatively flat rain garden, you don't really need one. As the slope increases, the bigger and bigger berm that you will need. You want to put clay soils in here. You want to really compact that, make it sturdy so, you know, it's going to stay in place. We don't want that eroding away. So that's why clay soil is really nice to use there. Okay. We've got the shape of our garden dug out. We want to add bioretention mix. Bioretention mix that you can make it yourself or you can buy it pre-mixed. Right here, you'll see the range of components of that bioretention mix that EPA recommends. 50 to 60% of that mix is going to be sand. 20 to 30% topsoil, 20 to 30% compost. This allows water to infiltrate nicely into the ground compared to the original soil there. Again, you can mix your own or use pre-mixed. When you're filling in the garden, remember, don't fill up that bioretention mix too far. You want to leave your ponding depth. And that's ponding depth, you know, including the mulch. You don't want to fill that whole area. You want to leave space for that water to collect. Downspout extension. With this, again, we want water to flow. Water flows downhill. We want to keep that downhill slope of the downspout extension into your garden. If you have a little bit of slope already, that's pretty easy. You can just dig out a trench for your pipe to lay in it, fill it back in, cover it with the grass, and it'll outflow very nicely into your garden. If you have a more flat area, I've seen people kind of elevate the point on the downspout. So cut their downspout a little bit higher and start the pipe higher and artificially create a slope, maybe along a fence or something, to get that downhill, you know, slope that they need to get the water moving. You'll just have to play around with the site that you have. I think that's it on that. Where your downspout comes into your rain garden. Oh, one thing I didn't mention, in that last photo, you saw corrugated piping, very commonly used. But if you have a more flat area or an area that gets a lot of foot traffic, You may want to consider PVC piping. It's a little bit sturdier. It's a little more expensive, but it'll last a little bit better for you. So here, inlets coming in, again, you have stone here to disperse the water. Water is filling through the rain garden. Over here, you have an area that's designated for water to overflow. If this entire rain garden fills up, this is a little bit lower than the rest of the berm. There's some stone protection here to just stabilize that berm in that area, because this is the designated area for that water to overflow into. Not something that you have to put in there, completely optional, up to you kind of thing. I know we're running short on time, so I'm going to try to go ahead, Jordan.
Just throw in something real quick. We had
Yeah.
a question in the chat, which I thought was a pretty good one. David asked, how bad is it for rain gardens to get hit with frequent flows above its capacity? And how much below that 90% frequency number can I go? I mentioned in the chat that increasing the stone on the overflow and on the inlet can help mitigate that. But do you have a number percentage that we can shoot for, where it's safe to?
I don't. I would have to look that up. What I would recommend though is, you know, trial and error sometimes is the best way to go. Like, to play it on the safe side, to over plan your rain garden, make it bigger than you think it will need to be made, is typically a little bit safer to do. But, you know, you can kind of just see how storm events go and go in and make adjustments from there. Yeah. All right, we are in the home stretch here. Once we have the garden dug out, bioretention mix in, time to plant. Okay, we're planting our native plants, hopefully, within the garden. We're limiting the amount of shrubs that we're putting in there. Again, it's going to look very sparse when you first install it. It typically takes about 3 years for, you know, the garden to reach maturity. You know, we're adding mulch here to help keep moisture in the ground and protect those plants. Once you plant these plants, they're going to be in shock. Once a plant goes from one area and gets planted in a whole new area, it's definitely in shock. So you'll want to make sure to water it really nicely as soon as you install, and water pretty consistently until these plants get established. Just keep an eye on them, and just water is necessary. It's very nice to plant in the fall after the intense heat is done with. That'll help, you know, less stress to the plants, if you are able to do that. The mulch that we are selecting, we recommend shredded hardwood. It stays in place. We don't want mulch that's light that will just float away at the first rain event. So we recommend shredded hardwood. And here we have our final product. We have downspout extension coming in this way. It's emptying in the rain garden. We've got our stone protection here, dispersing the water. A nice flat level garden, so the water is evenly dispersing throughout the entirety. If we do have a significant rain event, this garden will fill up, and anything that it can't hold will overflow in this direction away from the neighboring property. Again, maintenance is really important to consider. You know, those first couple of years are really important in getting these plants up and running. Native plants are really great at acclimating. So once you get them up and running, you really won't have to do a lot of care unless there's a drought or something during the summer. They might appreciate some water then. Oops, yep. Weeding, that is something that is, the more you stay on top of it, the easier it'll be. I recommend to folks when you first install your plants, I do recommend taking pictures of those plants right away, particularly the leaves, because those weeds will sneak in there. And before you know it, you're going to look at your garden, you're like, was this the plant I want, or is this a weed? So being able to refer back to photos could be helpful. Keep an eye out for invasive species that might come in. They're really aggressive and will really outcompete your native plants if allowed in there. So you want to get them out as quick as possible. Again, mulch layer, you want to keep a nice layer of mulch to keep moisture in at first. When you go back in, you don't want to keep dumping mulch on top of mulch on top of mulch. You might want to clear out any mulch and reapply if you think necessary, but remember, you want to keep that ponding depth, so you don't want to keep adding on top, so that you can keep that area for the water to pool. A bunch of different resources here. This recording will go out to you after, so you can hit them. A lot of them have already been put in the chat for you. So it's just some resources to help plan and install your garden. A lot of these links are on this first website off the Alliance's page. Additional ones to help out with plant selection, I've mentioned these. A lot of different maintenance resources available for you to take a look at. All right, I know that was a lot of information. I tried to go through as quickly as possible. What questions are out there that have not yet been answered?
Thanks, Jamie. That was a ton of information. I know
really
Jenna shared that a ton of good information, right? So, and Jenna mentioned in the chat that we are going to be sending all of these resource links out with the recording tomorrow. So if you didn't get a chance to grab those, please keep an eye on your email. There were a couple good questions in the chat. I'm just curious if we need to elaborate on any of those, Jordan. The one about water draining faster is interesting to me. I'm curious, like, you know, if you do the PERC test and you've got water that's draining really quickly, what is your approach then to like what species you might put like further down in the garden versus some that would be a little bit further up, like towards the berm?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think there are two things to consider. First, we're probably talking about really sandy soil, which means when you're making your bioretention mix, you don't have to add as much sand. You want to add a higher percentage of compost, maybe a higher percentage of other soil if you have some good not sand on the site, to mix that in to try to even out your growing medium. It's still going to drain really fast because there's going to be sand all around it, if that's what we're dealing with, but that's okay. So you definitely want to be looking for plants that are kind of designated as liking well-drained soil. On our native plant website, I believe that was linked. That is a designation you can look for. You can select the native plant center, well-drained soil, and that's going to give you a good options.
Great. Besides, you know, the obvious benefits of helping you manage your stormwater and your property a little bit better, are there any other benefits to a rain garden that, or like plants that you'd like to plant in a rain garden that have cool benefits, like potential berries that you can harvest or other types of things?
That's a hard question to answer. So Jordan, I'm going to come to you next, but my favorite native plant is the dwarf crested iris. So that's a plant that likes water. I like them in rain gardens. I don't know, like I have a bunch of different native plants around, but I'm not sure specific to rain gardens. Jordan, do you have any recommendations on that note?
For specific plants or for plants that just have other benefits? Yeah, sure. So yeah, there's a lot you can do with a rain garden depending on what you're trying to kind of accomplish and what you like. I have coneflower out in my backyard and the goldfinch love that. We also have milkweed and the monarchs love that. So if you like pollinators, you can kind of gear your garden towards that. If you like a little bird habitat, you can do that. You can put in beautyberry, the birds love. Those are edible, though apparently they don't taste like anything. A lot of the kind of edible natives aren't great for rain gardens just based on the soil conditions. You could probably do blueberries up on the side of the garden where they're not like down in the middle. One thing you want to be cautious of, that this is collecting water from your roof or your driveway, and you might not want to eat something that's been sitting in that water. So, I recommend people avoid planting herbs in a garden, any sort of vegetable, or if it's a berry or a vegetable, it's got to be up above the water line. You don't want it sitting in the water.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jordan. We've got a blog post that we just put out on our blog a couple of weeks ago that's got a black chokeberry jam recipe that's pretty cool. So if anybody thinking about planting chokeberries around their house, that is one to check out for sure. I think that covers all the questions that we had in the chat at this point in time. So Jamie, unless there's anything else you wanted to throw in here, I think we're probably good to wrap up.
Awesome. Well, I did my best to talk fast and get through a lot of information. Again, utilize those resources. There's a lot of great information out there. And I would just encourage you all to play around with things, try a few plants. If it doesn't thrive in one area, maybe move it to a different area of your yard, play around with, seeing what, is attracted to that, what birds might come, that sort of thing. So it can be a lot of fun. So don't feel afraid to not get it perfect from the get-go, because there's a lot of room to make adjustments in the long run.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. And thank you everyone for joining us. As we said, keep an eye on your email for a recording from this and as well as the resources. So thank you for joining us. That concludes today's presentation.
Great.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.